Well, let's spend a little time with Montana treasures. And in introducing Tom Minckler, I'd have to say that is a Montana treasure. It's not just the documents that he collects and shares with us all, but Tom Minckler and I have been friends for a long, long time. And I don't know of anybody who's done more to bring the very rarest and most important documents, photographs, and so on back to Montana from around the country, maybe even around the world, than Tom Minckler. We're fortunate to have him in Montana, although he and Abigail spend a little time in New York now and then. Fortunately, Abigail loves horses, and Billings is a great draw for Abigail, I think, as well as for Tom. And without belaboring all of his virtues, which there are, let me just say that what Tom's going to share with you is important history, and some of it, a very important piece of it, relates directly to the Mullan Road and John Mullan and Gustav Sohon and so on. So Tom, come wave your magic wand for us.
Thank you, Ken, for your kind words, and thank you, everybody that gathered together and started this wonderful convention, for inviting me. And I feel like Robin Williams. Pardon? I feel like Robin Williams right now in the movie when he goes, "Good morning, Vietnam," and I want to say, "Good morning, Missoula," and fellow Mullanites. So I have a good history in Missoula. I love Missoula. I love Western Montana. Actually, I love everything in the Northwest. But I received a few degrees here. It took me 5 years. And Missoula is just back in the 60s and 70s, which was a rabble-rising time, as many of you know. It was a center of culture. And I can remember going to speakers like, now I can't remember his name, Charles Ehrlich. He wrote The Population Boom in the 60s. Paul Ehrlich, thank you. Paul Ehrlich, and speaking with him as a student. And let's see, who else did I see? Oh, Robert Kennedy. And his bodyguard pushed me away because I was about 5 feet as he was exiting the field house, and I'll never forget that, so I stayed away. That was about a year, I believe, just before he was assassinated at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. Can I help you?
Yeah, sorry. Can you move it up so it's closer to your mouth? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That's my dear wife. She's taking care of me. And then music in Missoula. Wow. I stood as close as I am between Ken and I with Chuck Berry just wailing on his guitar, and what a treat. I stood 15 feet away from, and everybody knows because she just recently died, Tina Turner. And she was with her wife beater, I can't remember his name, whatever it was. This is in 1970. But there were three ladies, and she had a glistening dress, and as a, what was I, 85, no, I was like 20, and I'm just fixed on Tina. I love Tina. During college, I was a apprentice at a bindery in Missoula called Dean Schaffner, and he was up Patty Creek Canyon. And I think I made $1.75 or $2 an hour, but that certainly paid for my food as a student. And Dean and I, he knew I loved Montana history. And one day, when I came in after school, he said, "Would you like a private audience with U.S. Senator Burton K. Wheeler?" And this is a year before he passed. And I almost had tears in my eyes. And he was gracious enough to stay in the foundry, and I had a personal audience with Burton K. Wheeler for about 20 minutes. But as a kid, at least I was, I'm sure everybody else here was really smart, but I was so, not ignorant, but naive. And so the questions I asked him was, did he know Charlie Russell? Well, that's not the question to ask Burton K. Wheeler. It's definitely not. And I studied under the iconic Montana historian K. Ross Toole. And after I graduated from college and moved to the West Coast, he became a good friend, and I call him my mentor. He was a fantastic speaker, and et cetera, et cetera. So I have been a passionate collector for over 50 years. I began collecting stuff as a child when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, but I became serious when I moved to San Francisco after college, and I worked for a company called Berger and Evans. And I learned the business in 1972 from, I dealt with all the great institutions from the Bancroft to the Beinecke at Yale, and et cetera, et cetera. So I was getting my PhD while I was working for this company. I collected historic letters, documents, paintings, rare books, and other memorabilia, maps, and et cetera, et cetera. And in effect, I was collecting primary source material, which, as most of you probably know, is the most important source of us lovers of history and historians of where we can derive our material from. I purchased items from coast to coast in Canada and brought them home, even though we live on the East Coast in New York. I'm a Montana fourth generation native, but I brought them back to Montana, which I'm very proud of and feel it's one of my great accomplishments in life. In 1999, I received a phone call from a gentleman in Washington State, and he asked if I wanted to buy his collection of John Mullan material, original photographs, letters, documents, and 3 diaries. He did not want to sell the collection. He was a collector outside of Seattle, but he wanted to build a cabin, so he needed the money, and he called me. I listened to his description for about 15 minutes of what was in the collection, and I had to pinch myself. I couldn't believe that this kind of original primary resource material would be in private hands. So we struck a deal right there, and I bought it, sight unseen. And when the boxes arrived about a week later, it was like Christmas all over again. I opened the boxes and pulled out these items, and I'll show you a few of them as we go along. So obviously today's presentation will highlight my items from the Mullan collection that pertain to Mullan, and a few to Missoula. Did I say Mullan? From the Mullan collection. So on the screen, we have the dust jacket of my newly released book, Montana Paper Trail. And you can see there that it's a collage of some of my collection in the form of documents and photographs, historic art, and I guess there's some rare books up there too. Now, this book almost killed me. It's 7.5 years of research and writing, starting in 2015. And I didn't know if I could finish it. It was so difficult because it covers the whole state, but it also covers the Northwest. So from Washington all the way to Minnesota, and even a little bit into Wisconsin, and then south to Kansas. So it covered so many subjects. I thought I was a brilliant, I knew everything, but after 7.5 years, I found out that there was a lot to learn on this. We have big history here. The book weighs a mere 7 pounds. It's not for the timid. It's 440 pages and 449 illustrations. And basically, it's a collecting narrative of my life and a history of the Northern Plains and Montana and the Pacific Northwest. What button is it? Here we have an original albumin photograph of Isaac Ingalls Stevens. And you can tell that it was common during that time to put pigment on certain features, his eyebrows, his what's that, a cravat, and some of his clothes. And so they would color over the photograph to enhance it. This also has a beautiful Spencerian script, hand-signed signature of his autograph, and then Washington Territory. And this photograph was taken at the time he was appointed by President Franklin Pierce as president in 1853. And of course, along with that job, he became the superintendent of Indian Affairs in the territory, a big job in itself. Plus, Secretary of War Jeff Davis appointed him to run the Northern Survey of the Pacific Railroad. It's no wonder he only stood 5'3" tall, just a slight man. But it's no wonder many historians have referred to him as the human dynamo. And it's unfortunate that we lost him at the Battle of Chantilly in 1862. A lot more could be said about him. Sorry about this lag, but I got to find the buttons. Okay. This is a wonderful carte de visite, which is French for calling card. And it was common in the 1850s to the 1860s. And it it was photographed by, and everybody knows Gustavus Sahon, who after his time with the expedition, he moved to San Francisco for a short time, and you can see he had an ambrotype or photographic gallery in San Francisco, in the city on Market Street. I have never seen another photographic imprint of Sahon, and this is just a treasure to behold. Here we have on the left, and with the signature page on the right blowing up, but on the left, on March 1st, 1871, the Blackfoot Pierre de Schmidt wrote a letter to Colonel S.F. Tappan, who was the superintendent of Indian Affairs in Washington, D.C. And in effect, Tappan, on behalf of the publishers of the McKinney and Hall iconic book called The History of the Indian Tribes of the United States, which was a large 3-volume elephant folio with 120 colored lithographs, that was published between 1836 and 1844. So they wanted to reprint a smaller, an octavo edition, which is roughly 9 by 6 inches. And they were requesting information on Chief Victor, the great Flathead chief. 5 pages, like I mentioned, and in the first few pages, first of all, I should say, there was a trifecta friendship between Victor, de Schmidt, and John Mullan. And de Schmidt's beautiful handwriting, he writes a memorial on Victor, and calls him one of the greatest chiefs and one of the greatest leaders and spiritual men of his time in western Montana. He also quoted John Mullan's memorial extensively in the 3rd or 4th page. And I have never seen another extremely important historical document by de Schmidt in private hands. And I lost this initially. I can tell you a little about my collecting world. At Sotheby's in 1999, I was in the audience for a major auction, and I was just blown out of the water on anything I wanted. And some wealthy newspaper man bought this. And I shouldn't say fortunately, but unfortunately he passed away 6 years later, and this came up again at Sotheby's, and I was able to purchase it. So I never give up. So at the end of this letter, de Schmidt comes back and gives a story about Victor. And it's, he quotes his description of him as a dignified simplicity character that he possessed. And he tells this lovely story of when Victor first came to the Flatheads in, I lost the date, 41 or 42, we'll just say the early 1840s. Preston, do you know? 41, thank you. And he, of course, was setting up a mission and living with them. And he would regale them with stories of the persecution of the church, the Bible, Samson, Noah's Ark, the history of Europe, and Napoleon, the Battle of Waterloo, and you can picture him in the field standing up and all the flatheads surrounding him, just taking in all his great stories. So then he went into how the Roman Catholic Church in Rome had been persecuted for 1,800 years, and at that point, and survived their enemies. And at that point, Victor stood up. And I want to read this because I can't do it justice. De Schmidt is paraphrasing the words of Victor, which are so interesting. If I can find this. Shouts our great father, the good chief of the black gowns. Be in danger, you speak on paper or write. Send him a message in our name. This is the pontiff now. Invite him to our mountains. We will raise his lodge in our midst. We will hunt and feed him, and will keep his lodge provided, and will guard him against the approach of his enemies. Chief of the Black Gowns. I love that term. So a year later, De Schmidt is on his way to Rome, and he has an audience with the Pope.
Thomas, there's some confusion about who is speaking, whether it's Victor or De Schmidt, like some.
I quoted the letter, the De Schmidt letter.
But he was quoting Victor?
He was paraphrasing Victor.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So he gets an audience with the Pope and he relates this narrative. And the narrative elicits a major smile from Pope Gregory the 16th. And that is what we call dignified simplicity coming from Victor. This is a very rare booklet with a map. It's titled The Nez Perce and the Salmon River Gold Mines. And I won't tell you the story how I got this, and I'm not super religious, but it was a miracle that I was able to get this again at Christie's when I shouldn't have gotten it. But there are only a few copies known. I believe this is the only copy. And to give you a size of idea of its size, this is the document. But the important, or the booklet, the important part of this is the map. And this booklet was published on the heels of the discovery of the gold mines in Idaho, which was then Washington Territory. And it's one of the most important maps ever produced of this period. And where's that? And I want to point out a few items. Where's Walla Walla? Is that Walla Walla there? Yeah. So here's the trail that goes up, and it's not called the Mullan Trail. Mind you, this was published in 1862, so the information was gathered in 1861. So this is just really before map makers put Mullan's Trail on there. So he comes up to the main route, which is up here in the Key. He comes up to Coeur d'Alene Lake, and as you scholars know, initially he went below the lake, but that flooded, so he went above the lake, I believe back in 1861, and he redid some of the road. But it comes through Missoula and out there. I did a a shoot up of this, an enlargement. And in Montana, on the western part of Montana, there are only 2 locations, one being Fort Owen and below that being Cantonment Stevens. So the map maker knew Mullan, but he didn't label this route Mullan yet. The okay. Now here we're getting into the crux of my Christmas tree or Christmas presents opening when I bought the Mullan collection 1859. Standing here on this CDV is John Creighton and his wife Mary. This was taken after the Mullan expedition. He was the head wagon master of the Mullan Road. And probably taken on the occasion of their marriage, 1858. He looks like a hulk of a man. You would have to be the head wagon master. He looks like Samson. This is his diary next to it, and of the Mullan Road that he kept intermittently between 1859 and 1860. I'll show this to you because I love showing original material. It really elicits interest in history from a different angle. But here's this little gem here. And diaries, how did that get there? Okay, give you a peek sneak of something. Where am I going? No, just stay there. Stay there. Simmer down. So diaries are really important for researchers because there's nothing like it. While history is happening, a diarist keeps a daily account of items, and he also adds a lot of material into that you wouldn't generally put into the diary. And I consider this diary a gem, and extremely happy to find it. And we'll dig a little bit deeper into the diary here. And this is a log of a expedition. He was stationed, Creighton at this time was stationed at Fort Leavenworth. He was a lowly teamster. And they were given orders with the 6th U.S. Army Regiment stationed at Leavenworth to travel the 2,004 miles to Benicia, California, which is in the East Bay of San Francisco. And he gives the date. They started March 6th and they ended November 15th in Benicia. But the interesting part of this is this was the first wagon train to cross the historic Bridger Pass in Wyoming. And also, when they got to Fort Bridger, which was a major hub, they spent 17 days laying over. And I haven't, maybe I should do a deeper dive, but it's my thought that that is where they gathered the 140 mules that they then trailed to Benicia and boarded a bark called the Whitebird. Once there, they took a month-long tumultuous trip to Fort Vancouver to be let off. In the diary, you have to read his writing, it's really difficult. I found that they lost 10 mules on the voyage alone. So they debark at Vancouver, Fort Vancouver, and go along the Columbia to Walla Walla, and where Creighton becomes the head wagon master of the heads the supply train for the Mullan expedition. This is a little deeper dive into the diary. This is a list of the goods that Creighton was in charge of and distributing to different people. And you have mule whips, and you have wagon tongues and boxes, and et cetera. And this list is much larger. I'm only showing 2 pages here. On the right is one of my, I found this recipe that he labeled cholera medicine. And it's very interesting. This concoction is a pint of brandy, cayenne pepper, gum camphor, which was a crystalline powder, a derivative of turpentine, laudanum, which is a tincture of opium, essence of peppermint, and gum myrrh, which today is used to treat, I'm sorry, I skipped it. It's an aromatic gum resin, myrrh is. But the last item is black cohosh, which today is used to cure menopausal symptoms. So all this was thrown together, and I think it either cured someone, killed them, and at the least made them highly inebriated. A pint of brandy is something. Here is a list of the civilians that, according to historian Ken Robison, who wrote about this 10 years ago, this identifies 23 new people that we never knew were on the expedition. And it shows their wages and who they were. So Creighton, being the head wagon master, he receives $100 a month. The Armstrong, the assistant, receives $80 a month. All the teamsters and the saddlers and the blacksmith, they receive $50 a month. And even the poor teamster who doubled as a chef, he still only received $50 a month. This was apparently, these men were hired at Fort Vancouver before they left for Walla Walla because, I can't think of his name. Rufus Ingalls. And he was a captain there at Fort Vancouver, and he wrote a postscript on here, and he said, if Armstrong, who was the assistant wagon master, didn't stay sober and make himself useful, discharge him. And I don't know if anyone knows, did Armstrong make it any further on this? Now the next 2 images, and I'll show them to you so you see the size, how small CDV or carte de visite is. There's 2 of them in here, so they're roughly 4 by 5 or 3 by 4 inches. So this is the only known photographs, there are 2 of them, of the supply train for the Creighton, for the Mullan expedition. And unfortunately, they did not write. Sometimes you can identify the town with the signs, but there's not. There's a picture gallery you can see right here to the left of the wagons. I'd love to identify these gentlemen, and but I can't get any. There's only a small hint recently that I found that might identify this as Walla Walla. And here's the reverse side. He did 2 photographs, and here's the, where's the picture gallery anyway is over there. This isn't working on the far right. So I think it's Walla Walla, but I don't know. I need some scholars to help me identify those. Now the next photo is a stereo card, what we call a stereo card, and I'll show you what that is. And many of you are probably familiar, but you put it in a scope, and they're a little off register, and so when you see it in the scope, they become 3D. And this also was unidentified, but I was able to identify what this extremely important photograph was by the log building on the far right. It's called the Osborne Drugstore. And that drugstore was built in Bozeman in 1864. So then with Lee Whittlesey and a few other people, Steve Jackson at Bozeman, I sent this photo, copy of the photo to them, and there were 3 or 4 scholars that were together, and they believe that this is the only known supply train for the Ferdinand Vanderveer Hayden 1871 expedition. And on that expedition, of course, is Thomas Moran, as you know, William Henry Jackson, and a photographer from Bozeman named Joshua Chrisman, who was invited by Jackson. And this is a Chrisman image. And Chrisman, the interesting part about Chrisman is he left, and I'm not sure if this is the wagon, to bring all their glass plates back early, while Jackson and a few other people were finishing up. So he got to Bozeman immediately, and he was the first to develop and distribute photographs of Yellowstone Park. And of course, it became a park the next year because of all the information they gathered, in part at least. You'll love this, Mullanites. April 17th, 1860. John Mullan. This is the only known letter written from the Mullan expedition while the road was being built. It's camp on the Bitterroot, so he basically is writing instructions to John Creighton, the Wagon Master, to distribute goods somewhere around, what's up there, Jordan, Cantonment, Jordan. And I believe that was a really difficult portion of the road to build. He has the worst handwriting in the world. Maybe Thomas Francis Marr could match him, but I would hate to have to read his writing. Here we have a member of both the Stevens report, Walter, and the Mullan report, Walter Washington DeLacy. And this is a cabinet card. I'll show you if some aren't familiar with a cabinet card. It's about a 6x4-inch card, and they were very popular at the time. And this one happens to be hand-signed on the right-hand side, the upper right. But not most importantly, but importantly, the photographer is James Presley Ball, who was the first African-American photographer, at least in Montana. He lived in Helena between 1886 and 1900. This is a very rare photographic imprint, and I believe it has to be taken about 1886 or so. Here we have Granville Stewart's own copy that he identified the members, and then he numbered them, the members who spent the winter at East Bannock in 1862 and 1863. And I think there were several more, but this photo was taken by the Helena photographer E.H. Train, and in 1879, so maybe some of them were missing. But up here we have, of course, Granville Stewart. We have Conrad Coors next to him, and I'll skip over to Matthew Carroll of Matthew Carroll fame. And then seated here on the far right is Sam Hauser, the sometimes wannabe governor of Montana and a banker. I'm not a great fan of him. You have to read my book. And then here we have DeLacy. I would love to have talked to DeLacy in person. He was so magnificent. And next to him is the venerable James Fergus of Fergus County. Wonderful photograph, really important. DeLacy was 4 years with Mullan, and he got the gold fever after the Mullan expedition was over, and he surveyed several plats in Montana. He surveyed Fort Benton, he surveyed Deer Lodge in Argenta, and this is the only known original map by DeLacy in private hands. And I bought it within 1.5 miles of Fort Owen. Next to him, if there's anything DeLacy is known for, is he drew the first map of Montana. And this he was given from the first legislature of Montana. He was given $625 to do the map, which he had published in 1865. But this is the first down payment of $100 for that map, and it's endorsed on the reverse with by him. Here we have Gold Creek, of course, coincided with the end of the Mullan Trail on the Clark's Fork. Here we have a tintype of Granville Stewart and his 12 to 15-year-old full-blood Shoshone wife, Abani Tutanka. And these are the only known photos of this, and these were illustrations that were published in Teddy Boo Abbott's important book, We Pointed Them North. They came directly from the family. And there were other people at Gold Creek that had some interaction with the Mullan. On the left is Granville's older brother, James, with a beautiful signed signature on a train backdrop, and then his younger brother, Thomas Stewart, who also was involved in gold hunting. Okay, we're coming down to the last, no, we're not. We're coming down to 3 more. This is Granville Stewart's, I won't go into who he was. Everybody probably knows who he was, a pioneer of pioneers. But he was a collector also. And on this he would clip the signature, unfortunately. We lost all the information on the letter. But on this cover page, we have Frank Woody, one of the pioneers of Missoula. We have L.R. Mayette, who was on the Mullan Expedition. We have Fred Burr, the same, Thomas Adams. And on a later page, we have people like Alexander Culbertson of Fort Benton fame, and C.P. Higgins, who was one of the founders of Missoula. So those were men Granville Stewart himself thought were important. Okay, the final two, and this is a tintype of Chief Joseph. 1877-78, taken at Indian Territory after the surrender at the Bear Paw. And standing next to him is a young man named Ralph Armstrong. And young Armstrong lost his mother, his sisters along the route between the Big Hole and the Bear Paw. And then his father was shot and died 4 days after they came to Indian Territory. Joseph looked at the man, and this information came from Nez Perce people, looked at him and said, "You are an orphan now, you are now my son, and I will take care of you." A poignant photograph, unknown, and I think one of the most important photographs of a Native American on the American West. And the last item is Joseph, I shouldn't say, Looking Glass Joseph and the Nez Perce are coming toward Missoula. And John Gibbon from Fort Shaw is sending a letter to C.C. Ron, right here, outside of Missoula. Well, we all know where he was stationed, Fort Fizzle. So the instructions and this letter was written July 30th, 1877. The instructions were to Ron, obviously by courier, there was no mailman, to keep Joseph from going north toward Flathead country, and Gibbon would be coming with his troops and would block him from going east, and so to send him down to the infamous Battle of the Big Hole. Letters like this of such important historical information during the heat of a battle are extremely, extremely rare, and I'm just very fortunate in having that. I'd like to leave you with a quote. And what's this all about? Why am I collecting historical documents? I mean, I wrote about it in my book, and I should write more about it. But how do we engage the younger generation in our history? How do we get the 20s and 30s engaged? And that has been the age-old question for 10 years amongst many of my friends who were scholars and professors. How do we do it? And I've done it in my little way by showing my collection to a lot of children, and I'll hand them an original Custer letter, or I'll hand them Abraham Lincoln document, and the little 10-year-olds will say, "Mr. Minckler, do you want me to touch this?" And I go, "Yes, hold that." And that really resonates with these kids, and some of them have been back. Of course, I give them a bullet from the Custer thing. That really helps for coming back, or a baseball card. So I want to leave you with this quote. How do you know where or what you are, or where you want to go, if you have no idea how you got where you are? That's the story of historians. That should be their mantra. It's certainly mine. Thank you. Does anyone dare ask me a question? This? Yes, yes. All the items here are in my book.
I have a couple of questions. Your the 1859 journal from Creighton is essentially the journal itself. Is identical to an 1858 journal of Father de Smet that St. Louis University holds. I'm just curious if you identified the material and was it a commercial product?
You mean the 18, they're identical?
Yeah.
Where are they?
It's at St. Louis University in their special collections.
Well, this collection came from John Creighton himself. I mean, that's why we're getting the Mullan letter.
This is just, it's Father de Smet's journal of a whole different trip, but it's the same time period, and I'm curious about which is a commercial product of the day. So if you were going to buy a diary, then it would be of that same material and that design and one source. Anyway, it would have come out of...
Well, I'm not familiar with it, but I'd love to see it.
The one you have, do you know what the material is? Because it's that nubby, I thought it was like a lizard skin or something. Do you know?
It's, you mean the material of the diary itself? It's just a leather-bound cover with...
Unusual leather, so I was curious if you know more about it.
I don't.
Other questions about that Walla Walla, the picture you identified as Walla Walla, possibly?
Yes.
Walla Walla is a much broader valley, in my view, so I wondered why you think it is Walla Walla.
Well, my granddaughter and I last week, I used her eyes, and I found a map of Walla Walla in another book, and I didn't have time to buy it, but it's in, I think it's in, what book is that, Ken? You've got it over here with all the articles. Anyway, it has a map of names some of the early merchants, and there's one merchant that's MC, and we zeroed in on that, and there's an MC, and then the rest of it is not legible. But I don't know. I'm guessing, and it's strictly a guess. There has to be someone. I don't know if there's someone at Whitman College that could help, or you can?
Well, I did attend Whitman, and we went out to the mission to learn history. And I was also skeptical because there was that hillside was so close. Yeah.
The which?
But I mean, well, the hillside.
The hill, yes, and that threw me off, but I'm not familiar enough with.
I remember, not from 1960, but from being back in Walla Walla a few years ago and going out to see the mission again, I do recall hillsides. And so it's probably a broad definition of Walla Walla when you're locating that.
I don't know if it could be Vancouver. I don't think so. And I do have another CDV and it's identified as the Dalles. And the Dalles looks really rustic and decrepit compared to these. So I need help. A reward. Ken will give a reward. Yes.
Another source that may produce some similar photographs along the same time period that Mullan was building, especially the north portion of the road. The Northwest Boundary Commission was surveying from the coast in, and they have a team of extremely well-trained photographers with them to record the survey. The Mullan team and both the British surveyors and the Americans had a separate work, wintered together at Mulville. And a lot of photographs of that are British.
Or British. Interesting. So, but Mullan's expedition from Walla Walla, they would not have gone to Colville, unless maybe they were resupplying? They did? Oh, so it could be
The Mullan team, at least part of it, and the American and British survey teams both are listed together on the 1860 U.S. Census by name and hometown.
Interesting.
That's some good resources here.
Good resources. Well, if there's anyone in where to go, it's right here, isn't it? To find out what it's about. Any other questions? Thank you.